Today on Issue at Hand, I tell you the best way to buy comic books. Also today on Issue at Hand, I explain how annoying it is to buy comic books. This is Issue at Hand, Polygon's series about the weird world of comic books, and I'm your host, Susanna Polo. And in order to explain the best way to buy comics, I have to explain how comics are sold, because today I'm talking about how comic book distribution is its own worst enemy. There are 3 good ways to buy comics: in a store, issue by issue, buying digital comics, and waiting to buy collected editions. Most of this video will be about buying single issues, because it's the most complicated and the most dominant. Here's one caveat. This applies specifically to the way American comics are sold in America, Canada, and the UK. Pop quiz. What does every major comic book publisher in the United States have in common? They all have exclusive agreements to only allow Diamond Comics distributors to print and ship their books. The Department of Justice actually investigated Diamond for antitrust violations in the late 90s, but ultimately didn't bring forth any charges. This was possibly because the DOJ decided that comics are such a small niche of the wider publishing industry that if a monopoly existed, it wasn't worth prosecuting. Diamond's monopoly is at the heart of why comics publishing is fundamentally broken in ways that are bad for creators, publishers, press, and consumers. And it begins with how Diamond doesn't sell comic books on consignment. In the book publishing industry, there is a widespread practice of selling on consignment, where publishers sell books to bookstores that can be returned for full credit. If the store winds up with any unsold inventory, it can return it to the publisher to buy other books to sell. This allows bookstores to take risks on new authors and small publishers without endangering their bottom line. If a comic shop buys a comic and doesn't sell it, that money's gone. And despite what you may have heard about comic book collecting, the vast majority of comics do not appreciate in value over time. So, comic shops have to be very conservative with what they order, and that often means that there's no way to know if you'll be able to pick up a book before it sells out, if it was even ordered in the first place. The workaround for this is a pull list, which is basically just a list that you keep with your shop of all the books you want to reserve. The shop will then base its pre-orders around its customers' pull lists. But there's another really big problem this creates for the comic book industry, because without consignment, the final sale of a book isn't to the consumer on the day of release, it's to the shop 3 months before that. Final sale, the only sale that counts to the publisher, is the sale to the shop. This means that books can become bestsellers before they even get shipped, and they routinely do. In some cases, they sell really well when nobody even buys them. For example, if you've ever wondered how Cowboys and Aliens got greenlit, it's because the publisher of the Cowboys and Aliens graphic novel paid comic shops to pre-order lots of copies of it. It wound up on Diamond's monthly bestseller list, which was enough to impress Hollywood producers into making a movie of it, despite the fact that those shops were literally giving copies away. This also means that if a book sells poorly or comic shops underestimate demand for it, a series can be canceled before a single reader gets a chance to buy its first issue. And all of this has a huge effect on comics news and comics journalism as well. Pre-order deadlines on comics happen 3 months before they hit shelves, at a point where even the script may not be final, much less the art. And yet, that's the same time when the publisher needs to create buzz for their as-yet unwritten, unseen first issue. So shops will reserve it in anticipation of new readers, and current readers will pre-order it without ever seeing a page. This is one reason why Marvel and DC tend to diversify their universe not by creating original characters, but by putting a new character into a classic superhero identity. A new comic series has to sell 3 months before it ever hits stands, and the cachet of a known name in a fresh situation is a powerful sales driver. So let's go over this experience from the consumer side. Scenario number 1. You hear about a cool new comic and want to buy it. It won't be out for 3 months. You get busy and forget about it. This has no direct effect on the comic sales numbers. Scenario number 2. You hear about a cool new comic and want to buy it. It's out today, but your shop is sold out by the time you get there. You can't buy it. This has no direct effect on the comic sales numbers. Scenario number 3. You hear about a cool new comic and want to buy it. It's out today. You buy one from a shop. This also has no direct effect on the comic sales numbers. And finally, scenario 4. You hear about a cool new comic and want to buy it. It won't be out for 3 months. You make sure to go to your local comic book shop before the deadline and ask them to put it on your pull list. Months later, you visit your comic shop and buy it. This is the only one of these scenarios that has a direct effect on the comic sales numbers. So yes, the comics industry is set up in such a way that the consumer actions of casual readers are lost. like tears in the rain. But there's hope. America's big comics publishers have only been publishing digital editions of their comics for less than a decade now, but the effect is clear. We don't have hard numbers like we do for print comics, but we do know, for example, that the reason why Ms. Marvel has an audiobook adaptation, a young adult novel, and is on 2 different superhero teams, despite the fact that her award-winning ongoing series has unremarkable sales, is because she is one of Marvel's top-selling digital comics. Buying digitally is the same price as buying in print, and a book never sells out. Also, you don't have to go outside to get it, and your house will not become filled with long boxes. Not that I have any personal experience with that. The first 3 Ms. Marvel collections also hit the New York Times bestseller list, which brings me to our third way of buying comics, waiting for the trade collection. When I was getting into comics, there was no guarantee that a series would ever be republished, but these days, pretty much everything gets a trade paperback, and that makes waiting for the collected edition a viable way of keeping up. Of course, this means you're waiting 6 months or more to start reading, but trade waiting does have its advantages. It's way cheaper, for example, and you actually get to see a book's reception with fans and critics before you buy. And there are signs that the readership of trade collections and graphic novels is growing in a way that publishers are starting to notice. Hopefully, that will keep more comics from being canceled before they get to their first trade. So, now that you have the backstory, you're probably wondering, what's the best way to buy comics? Well, it depends on what you mean. What's the best way to contribute to the success of a book you like and the people who make it? Unfortunately, while things are slowly changing, the answer to that is very clear. The best way to support a book is to go to your preferred comic book shop and set up a pull list. It goes without saying that this is stupid. The best way to buy a thing should be the way that puts the fewest hurdles in front of the consumer. And when people ask me the best way to buy comics, I tell them, the best way to buy comics is the most convenient and enjoyable way for you. But if you want to support the books you read in the most direct way possible, you should get a pull list at a comic book store. Ugh, comics. Next time on Issue at Hand, something less depressing. The wider publishing industry, that if it will, small niche of the wider publishing industry, that if the wider publishing industry, that if I did it again. Okay. And here I was thinking there wouldn't be anything for the stinger this episode.